Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Shannon's Shelf. I am Shannon. That's me. So, at least that's what my parents called me, and I called myself that now by extension, and I think that's typically how that works. But by the way, today I wanted to talk about mostly a book, and I read this book a few months ago, actually, but it's still relatively fresh on my mind, and I definitely enjoyed it, so that's why I'm going to talk about it. This is another work of nonfiction. It was more academic, but very, very approachable academic work, and that is Private History in Public. And this is the exhibition and the sitting of everyday life by Tammy S. Gordon, and she is a professor in the public history department at North Carolina State University over in Raleigh. Private history in public. So this is about pretty much there are two main dichotomies when it comes to history, right? When at least when we're talking about exhibiting history, and that is our private history and our public history. In public history, you think of these big public museums. I worked, or I was volunteer, but I was there for over a year at the Museum of Idaho. It's a pretty big regional institution in eastern Idaho, kind of on the Highway 20 on the way to, well, 15. It's where 15 and 20 meet. So if you're going north, which not a lot, that's a very empty part of Highway 15, but 20, you branch off 20, that's towards Yellowstone. And so pretty common road trip spot for lots of people, at least during summertime when Yellowstone is very busy. But I lived a couple hours, about 2 hours from Yellowstone, and I've been there a couple times. It's a great place, highly recommend it. And but these big public museums, right? You get all this public history, and then the flip side of that is the private history, and this is usually stuff like family photos in your home, and this she's kind of talking about where do they meet? Where is that border foggy? And she was saying it's usually in the smaller regional museums, but it can even be in like little displays at a diner or something like that. And I mean, I definitely know what she's talking about. I don't know if this is generally true. You get little exhibits like that in diners and stuff overseas, but this is pretty common in America. I would assume so in Canada. I've not spent a lot of time overseas, at least not in other Anglo countries. But regardless, and she talks about how the history is different, or at least the way it's presented is different. Because in many ways, you're giving personal histories or family histories, or maybe more just community histories, and they're way more personal. But you're putting them out there for the public. So it's usually way more involved for the people that are doing it, and it feels more intimate for the people that can come and experience it. I highly recommend, if you're traveling across the country, that you go to the local museums. We have a lot in the United States, at least. Some more so, other regions have more than others. One other museum I worked at was the Museum of Rexburg in Rexburg, Idaho. And it's kind of one of the more smaller shops. In fact, I kind of felt a little odd working there because I was not from Rexburg. I almost felt like this should be for locals. And the lady running it was essentially a local, not from Rexburg, but from around Rexburg. And lots of the high school students that would do summer jobs there were locals, of course. But most of the other employees, and there were only a handful of us, were just kids going to the college, and that included me, and we were not from the area. There were some, though. But you definitely have to approach it differently. And one thing is, when I was working there, I definitely felt obligated to learn the history. I not only did I have to give tours, but I needed to be able to answer questions that could be related to any sort of thing. Now, I could always, of course, say, well, you can ask my boss or whatever, because she knew more than I did, and that was always the case, of course. But I felt like I needed to be informed many ways like a local would. I'm presenting their history. This is not my history. The most ties I have to the history is maybe the history of the university that I was going to. And it was a very interesting experience and a great experience, actually. I hardly got paid. I did get paid for that one as opposed to the other job, which was just volunteer, but it was like the lowest wage I've ever earned in my life. I won't say how low it was, but you can ask, I guess, and I might tell you in the comments if you're interested. This is I mean, I'm sure lower wages back in, last century when the minimum wage was that much lower, but still. And I think it really helped. Museums like that helped me appreciate the area. In fact, what was weird, lots of locals don't go to those museums. I think that might need to be more into like rotating exhibits and stuff like that. But most of the people that came were people that were just passing through. So definitely during summertime on your way to Yellowstone, or if you had a kid that was graduating from the college, you went to the local history museum. So most people were out of towners. It just gives you a good feel of the area, because I think the best way to get a good feel of an area is to live there, is to be among the locals. But if you're just passing through, the next best thing is to go to their the museum, their small like mom and pop, you know, easy going, laid back, pretty intimate museum. And these tend to not be very expensive. Lots of them actually are free because it's very well. It's very things are in some ways you could say more thoughtful than those in those big institutions because I'm not just putting these photos or these items out there of someone in state history or national history or whatever. This is my neighbor, or it might even be mine. This is my grandpa's or something like that. And I think it has way more meaning. Now, personally, I think the best thing you can do is perhaps that private history stuff that matters to the most is that which is your own, that which is your family's. And I think it gets diluted the further you get away from that. Community is more diluted than family, but definitely less diluted as opposed to the nation or maybe the state generally if you live in the United States. There are a lot of stories worth telling, I think. People are very interesting. I mean, I did a video on Berdiev's like pretty much justifying man, and I think men are. This is actually one of the problems I've had. If I have too many interests when it comes to things I think about maybe studying for graduate school. But one thing that is overarching for all of them, something I can definitely tie that back to, is like I'm interested in people. Now, I might be interested in people and with their relationships to each other, to religion and deity, and to just the cultures they're a part of. But I'm interested in people. I think people are definitely worth getting to know. Maybe not this one, but I think having ties to something is important. Kind of roots. Now, this is something that I've kind of thought off and on about. I think that most people are pretty itinerant, especially in America and maybe Western society, generally speaking. I've lived in several states personally, but the place that if someone was going to ask me where's home, besides the general answer, it's where my wife and kids are, which is definitely the case. If we're talking about what land do I feel tied to, well, it's Illinois. It's where I grew up. I haven't lived in Illinois since 2008. um, I was young when we moved, and yeah, I still feel drawn to it. And now this might not be the case for everyone. I don't know if any of my brothers feel that way, but I do. And I think even though I'm not in Illinois, I would actually love to be in Illinois. I'm actually holding the Illinois Heritage magazine. I finally got my first copy for the Illinois State Historical Society, which I'm a member of. They just had their 26th annual conference in Springfield at the Abraham Lincoln National Museum and Library. The land of Lincoln, as the license plates say there. I'm not in Illinois. If I was there, I think I would feel like I belonged to it. But at least in these other states I've lived, I think, again, the best way to get to know the areas is to go to the local history museums, if they have them, or the local historic sites. Talk to the people that know about it, have grown up around it. Those bigger institutions, there's not really bigger institutions around where I live currently anyway in Arizona, but they're cool, they're interesting. But I feel like often you could pick that building up and pluck it on the other side of the country and it's the exact same thing. Or maybe not so much, maybe pluck it just to a different part of the state and it'd be the exact same thing. Or maybe a regional thing. And that's fine. Those are there for a reason. But they're not on that human level. They're not on that human scale, as well as these more intimate, smaller museums, or just with those private items on public exhibit, whether in a diner, at a truck stop, or what have you. And I think those are something that a lot of us ignore, especially when it's an area we don't care about. We're just driving through. But I think it's definitely something worth trying to care more about. Now, maybe my thoughts were a little disjointed, and I apologize if that was the case. I will see you guys next time. Please feel free to like and subscribe. I greatly appreciate it. Let me know if you enjoyed my thoughts, I suppose. This was loosely based on this book. She has a couple other books. It has like a big coffee stain. I came this way. I don't drink coffee, but just other couple books that I might check out at some point. We'll see. It's not really being prioritized really heavily right now. But if you are interested, I'm sure her other books are just as readable as this one was. So go check out Tammy Gordon. And yeah, I'll stop rambling now. You guys have a good one.